Okay guys, today we're going to talk about a monumental moment in science history.
Henrietta died in 1951 from a vicious case of cervical cancer, but before she died, a surgeon took samples of her tumor and put them in a petri dish. Scientists had been trying to keep human cells alive in culture for decades, but they all eventually failed. Henrietta's were different. And she was black.
That's all we get? The rest of me wanted the story. Where is she from? Did she know how important her cells were? Does she have any children?
I couldn't tell you.
This is a 1-to-1, 100% accurate recreation of what made Rebecca Skloot distraught and curious to learn more about the Lax family. When Skloot's professor was unable to answer her questions about the Lax family, she decided to start researching herself. What she found is that even after going through several books, the only Henrietta Lax related things she could find were about her cells. Eventually, when she got access to a computer, she was able to find a picture of the Lax family, and as she kept researching, she became obsessed with the idea of writing a book that dives deeper into their family history and experiences with the cells.
Throughout history, African Americans have often been subjected to unethical scientific practices. Two of the most notorious examples are the Tuskegee syphilis study and the Mississippi appendectomies. The Tuskegee syphilis study began in 1932 and lasted until 1970. This study involved 600 black men, 399 with syphilis and 201 without. Informed consent was never obtained, and the men were completely unaware that they had syphilis or that they were part of an experiment at all. Researchers falsely informed them that they were being treated for quote-unquote bad blood. To ensure their participation, the men were offered free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance. These incentives masked the true purpose of the study, which was to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis. From the 1920s to the 1980s, involuntary sterilization would be performed on poor black women that they deemed unfit to reproduce. In other words, eugenics. A campaign was launched in North Carolina, Mississippi, and Iowa advocating for the limitation of reproduction among those considered unfit. By 1980, an estimated 700,000 cases of involuntary sterilization had occurred. 85% of these cases were women, and 40% were women of color. On January 29, 1951, Henrietta Lax walked into Johns Hopkins Hospital, a facility built in 1889 as a charity hospital for the sick and poor. It was the only major hospital near the Lax family that treated black patients. During this time, Jim Crow laws were still prevalent, so black patients were often refused treatment at white-only hospitals, no matter how badly they needed treatment. Henrietta was there because of a tumor growing on her cervix. It was unlike any tumor her doctor had seen before, as it had grown unbelievably in just 3 months. Without her consent, he took a sample and sent it to pathology. When Henrietta returned to Hopkins for a second treatment, the tumor had shrunk significantly. Yet, she had no idea that samples had been taken from her. She began X-ray therapy once a week for a month. These treatments left her infertile, a risk she was never informed about. She was left in the dark for the entirety of her treatment process.
So what made her cells so special? Well, they were immortal. Scientists quickly discovered that her cells would keep growing no matter what. This was revolutionary in the science world because it meant that scientists could now do all their little experiments on living human cells rather than rat, chicken, and other animal cells. This meant that treatments for illnesses and diseases could be found quicker. The cells went on space missions to see what would happen to human cells in zero gravity. They helped with some of the most important advances in medicine, including the polio vaccine, chemotherapy, cloning, gene mapping, and vitro fertilization. They helped develop drugs for treating herpes, leukemia, influenza, hemophilia, and Parkinson's disease. They were used to study lactose digestion, sexually transmitted diseases, appendicitis, human longevity, mosquito mating, and the negative cellular effects of working in sewers. These cells were used by companies for profit. Entire factories with the sole purpose of creating and selling these cells were built. The creation of these factories did bring a polio vaccine, which was a much needed thing at the time. But the one detail about all this is that the Lax family heard nothing about it. To put things in perspective, Henrietta Lax died on October 4th, 1951, and her cells weren't taken long before. The Lax family had little to no knowledge about Henrietta's treatments, but it wasn't until 1973 that they learned about HeLa cells and the impact they had on the science world. In 1973, 2 scientists came to the Lax family looking for blood samples to do genetic marker tests. Of course, that's not what they said. When one of the scientists came to their house, they said they were testing them to see if they had their mom's cancer. During this time, a lawyer may have been able to say, that they could sue on grounds of invasion of privacy, but the family didn't know that research was being done using their DNA, and they especially didn't know that this research was being published. Even after they figured out, the family did not see any profits from the multi-million-dollar industry that was built from selling these cells.
At the end of the story, we read about the journey that Rebecca Skloot undertook with Henrietta's daughter, Deborah Lax. They were both incredibly different. Deborah was a deeply religious Black Christian from the South, while Skloot grew up agnostic in the Pacific Northwest as a white woman. Deborah leaned towards preaching, faith healings, and sometimes voodoo, while Skloot relied on science and solid facts. Despite these differences, the journey they took together was remarkable. They visited important landmarks, met with scientists, and delved into medical records. This was a path of discovery, not just for scientific knowledge, but also for personal reconciliation and connection. Their relationship evolved from one of initial skepticism to one of deep trust and mutual respect.
So with all that being said, would we recommend the book?
Yes, this book accomplishes its goal of retelling the true story of Henrietta Lacks and how her cells affected not just the world of science, but also her family. Skloot bounces back and forth between Henrietta's story and her own journey in a way that makes it both insightful and entertaining. Even though Henrietta's story gets intense with pretty vivid descriptions, it's still worth reading to understand how African Americans were treated in regards to medical needs during this time. Skloot's journey in collecting information to publish this book serves as a way for us to really see the cause and effect relationship between Henrietta's story and the present.
I agree. Going into this book, I knew no more than what Skloot's professor had told her. Henrietta was that one lady that has immortal cells. One aspect of this book I liked a lot is that the reader isn't just being told this story. We learn alongside Skloot. Her reactions are our reactions, her encounters are ours as well. We follow her through all the good, bad, and even traumatic moments. After reading the book, I understood the true impact Henrietta had on the world and the amount of injustices she faced. No stone was left unturned. So, if you want a full retelling of the Lacks history and an interesting story of how the information was obtained, we recommend this book.